Hey guys, today we are going to use geometry, or we're going to use trigonometry, to find some missing information about triangles, okay? And this is something you did in geometry, which is why I said that, okay? But we're going to be using trig to find missing information. So for example, here's a triangle. I've got an angle, I've got a side, and I've got this missing side that they want me to find. Well, first off, you're going to need a calculator today. So grab your calculator. And then I need you, it's going to depend on what kind of calculator you have. Okay, I've got this TI right here. If I look at the screen, down here you're either going to see DEG, or you're going to see like RAD, or even GRD. You want it to say DEG, that's degrees. There are other ways to measure angles. We're going to talk about those later. But for right now, we're just going to stick with what you know, which are degrees. So make sure your calculator says DEG. If it doesn't, there is a button. It's right next to your shift. It says DRG. Click that. Scroll over. Make sure you have the DEG. If your values do not come out to be like my values, it's probably because your settings are wrong and you need to fix that. Okay? There are other calculators that have different, I think the TI Multi-View has a button that says like mode. If you go to the mode, that's where you'll find this setting. Okay, there's some Casios that do it differently. So if you aren't sure, let me know and I'll look it up and I'll try to help you out with that. Okay, but this is going to be important. You got to be in the right setting. Okay, so first off, if I am missing a side of a triangle, I can set up a trig function using the relationship that they're giving me. Okay, they're giving me this angle, they gave me the hypotenuse, and then they're wanting me to find the adjacent side. Well, the trig function that deals with adjacent and hypotenuse is the cosine. So I'm going to go over to the side, and I'm going to say the cosine of my angle is, and then I'm going to set up the ratio that has to do with the cosine of a 37-degree angle, which in this case is going to be x over 14. Now, if you got a calculator, this is a piece of cake. We're going to take the cosine of 37. We're going to put that, we're going to figure out what that like decimal equivalent is that our calculator knows. So we're going to do the cosine 37. Some of you may have a calculator where you have to type in the 37 and hit cosine, so you'll figure that out. So cosine of 37 is that crazy number right there. And then we are going to cross multiply with the 14. The 14 needs to multiply up here. I could have actually done that first. 14 times the cosine of 37. And then I could have put it in my calculator. Okay, so the cosine of 37 times 14. So this number, just leave it in your calculator, times 14 is 11 we'll say 2 equals x. Always check to make sure your answer makes sense. Okay, the hypotenuse is 14. This has to be less than 14, so 11.2 makes sense for an answer. And that's it. That's our missing side. Okay, now you can also find missing angles, but you're going to have to do things a little differently. Okay, you're going to start out with the same idea. You've got this angle x. This is the angle that we're supposed to be looking at. They've got this side. I like to label my hypotenuse, make sure I know which one that one is right out of the gate. And then this one is my opposite side. So opposite and hypotenuse, this is a sine situation. So I'm going to set up a little sine problem over here. Sine of x equals 24 over 29. Now, this is not going to be solved the same way. I can't take and hit the sine of x in my calculator. I've got to get rid of this sign. I want to get the x all by itself. Well, all of the trig functions have what are called inverse functions, just like multiplication and division are inverses, or exponentials and logarithms from last semester. They were inverses of each other. The trig functions have inverses. They are simply called the inverse sine, the inverse cosine, and the inverse tangent. And the only way you can tell is this little -1 kind of exponent that's up there. But that's what this means. It means the inverse sine. So if I take sine and move it to the other side, so I'm trying to solve for x, my function is going to change into its inverse. Just like when you solve a multiplication problem, you divide by both sides. You do the inverse operation. So we're going to do the inverse sine of 24 over 29. Now, grab your calculator. If you look at the sine, cosine, and tangent buttons, right above them, you're going to see the inverse sine, the inverse cosine, and the inverse tangent. So we're simply going to hit second. Let me go ahead and clear my screen. Second, we're going to hit the sine button, and it's going to give us the inverse sine. And then I'm going to type in the 24 over 29. 24 divided by 29. Now, if you use your fraction button, that should work, but sometimes it doesn't. Certain calculators it doesn't work. You'll get an error message if you try to type this in as a fraction. So if you ever have that issue, just type it in as a division problem. Okay? Now, it equals, that's it, we're done. X equals 55 point, we'll just call that 0.9. Okay, 55.9. Now, what did we find? We found an angle. This is a 55.9 degree angle, and that's our answer for that problem. Okay, so missing sides or missing angles, you can find either one. Now, once you know how to do that, you can apply this to some story problems. Okay, so what I have is a story problem here about a surveyor. A surveyor is trying to figure out how wide this river is. So he puts a little, if you look here, he sets up, it's like a transit. You'll see those guys working on the road. You'll see one guy has like a little surveyor instrument. Another guy will have like something that he's holding that the surveyor is looking at. Okay, that's what they're talking about here. So he sets up this little transit at point C, and then he turns at a right angle and measures off a certain distance. In this case, it's 300. And he looks at the transit, and then he turns and looks across to the other side of the river. So maybe there's a rock here or a tree or just the bank of the river. And he finds that it's a 25-degree angle. Well, he can use that to figure out the width of this river. So just look at it as a triangle. Here's the angle they're giving us. This is the opposite side. This is the adjacent side. So what trig function uses those two sides of the triangle? Well, it's a tangent. So I'm going to set up a tangent problem. I'm going to take the tangent of my angle, tangent of 25 degrees, and I'm going to set it equal to the ratio. Well, part of the ratio is going to have a variable. The other part is going to have a value. And now I'm just going to solve this. So again, because I've got this 300 in the denominator, I can cross multiply 300 times the tangent of 25 equals b. And now I can plug this into my calculator. For the order of operations, just to make sure you understand, you can't multiply 300 times this value until you know what this value is. So this is what you have to do first. You have to take the tangent. So let me clear. So take the tangent of 25, hit equals, get that value, and then multiply that by 300, and there's our answer. There's a little glare. 139 point, well, we'll call it 9. Okay? 139.9, and actually I was bad. If I would have looked at the directions, it said round to the nearest meter, so I should have said 140. Okay? So in this case, I didn't. I would have caught myself, and I would have fixed it. But that's good enough for me as well. Okay, 139.9. Okay, look at the next one. They've got this situation where you've got a hotel, and then there's this trail where you can like walk up, you're walking uphill to this like pretty little overlook place. So you and your little sweetie, you walk up here hand in hand, okay, and you look out and you say, oh, look how lovely that is. Okay, so what's going on here, because there's an incline, is that we have this little triangle that we can look at. Okay, so this is actually just a horizontal measurement. This is like, you'd have to bore through the ground to get this. Okay, you're going uphill. The hotel is at 8,000 feet, so you're already in the mountains. So you're up in the mountains at 8,000 feet elevation above sea level, and you walk uphill to this overlook that is 11,100 feet. Okay, so the difference between those is your change in elevation. So you have traveled vertically 3,100 feet. So that's the opposite side of this triangle. The trail, that's the hypotenuse of the triangle. And the question is asking, what is this little angle here? How steep is that trail that you're walking up? Well, let's take a look at what we got. We got our angle, which they labeled B. We have the opposite side, and we have the hypotenuse. Well, that's sine. You're always going to have to make a decision about what trig function are we using. So, the sine of our angle B is 3,100 over 14,100. And so again, this is a sine problem, but I need to move that to the other side, so it's going to become an inverse. Sine and now I can type that in my calculator. Okay, so get off the glare. Second sine, and then 3,100 divided by 14,100. I like to close my parentheses, and that's my value, 12.7. The directions don't seem to say anything about rounding, so we'll just say that. Okay, 12.7 degrees. Okay? All right, so sometimes in a story problem, they describe the angle that they're referencing by using some different phrases. One is called the angle of elevation, and one is called the angle of depression. The first one is super, super easy. The second one confuses a lot of students, so please pay attention, okay? Now, the angle of elevation means you are looking out straight ahead, okay? Whenever we're looking, we usually look just straight ahead at something. And then you look up, okay? See how this arrow, this is the movement of your head or your eyes, okay? You look up at something. That angle that your eyes just made is called the angle of elevation, okay? So I'm here, I guess that's me, right? That looks like me. And I'm looking up at, I don't know, UFO, Frisbee, little hat that blew off my head, I don't know, okay? So that's the angle of elevation. The angle of depression it's found the same way. You are looking straight ahead, okay? You're looking out at the world like you normally do, and then you look down at something. And that angle that your eyes make, that's the angle of depression. Well, here's what's confusing about that. Look at our triangle. So we've got a triangle formed by this guy who's on this rock and the UFO or whatever it is. Okay, here's our triangle. The angle of depression is actually outside the triangle. A lot of students will try to put it here. It's not, you're not looking at your belly button and you look up at something. You're looking out and you look down. So between these two angles, it's actually this one. It's actually outside the triangle. So it's kind of no use to us because it's not in the triangle where we need it to be. Well, it's easy to move it. There's something you learned in geometry that talked about these two angles right here are congruent. Okay, I've got two parallel lines cut by a transversal, and these two they're alternate interior angles. Okay, I know it's been a couple years since geometry. Okay, but this angle is exactly the same as that angle, and that angle is in the triangle where we want it to be. This would be the angle of elevation from the little bitty alien looking up at you. Okay, so the angle of elevation and the angle of depression are actually the same. So whatever wording you get, you can always put the angle right here where the angle of elevation would be. Okay, so when I look at a problem like this and I say, okay, a man in a 120-foot tall tower lighthouse spots a boat out at sea with an angle of depression of 5 degrees. How far out to sea is the boat? All right, so we've got a lighthouse. It's usually right on the edge of the of the ocean. I'm not going to try to get draw a fancy lighthouse. Some of you are probably better artists than I am. Okay, and then there's a boat out here. Here's your boat. Very fancy boat. Okay, and you're looking out at the boat. Okay, so there's your right triangle. We're trying to figure out how far out into the water the boat is. We know how tall the lighthouse is, 120, and we know that the angle of depression is 5 degrees. So you're looking straight out at the beautiful sunset or something, and then you look down at 5 degrees. Or if you were on the boat and you looked up at the lighthouse, that would also be 5 degrees. And now that angle is inside the triangle where we want it. So now I can set up a trig function. I can say, okay, here's my angle. This is the opposite. This is the adjacent. So that's a tangent problem. The tangent of 5 degrees is 120 over x. Now, I gave you this problem on purpose because this one is a little trickier to solve. Remember, if you are solving for x, and x, or whatever variable, okay, and it's in the denominator, the first thing you want to do is get rid of it. You can't solve when an x is in the denominator. So cross multiply, move the x up here, and now to solve for x, since our x is multiplying the tangent of 5, we will divide by the tangent of 5. This is what we're going to put into our calculator. Okay, so if the x was on the top, if this would have been x over 120, we would have simply cross multiplied. Take 120 times tangent of 5 and we're done. But the way this is set up, that doesn't work. Okay, so if you look at the math and how you have to solve this, this is actually what we're going to do. We're going to take 120, let me clear everything, 120, and we're going to divide it by the tangent of 5. I'm going to go ahead, whenever they give me a parenthesis, I like to close my parenthesis. And that's our answer. 1,371.6. That'll work. That's how far out into the water, how many feet. If this is in feet, this is in feet. Okay, this is your answer, and I'm fine with that. If you want to put feet like an awesome kid, that's great. Okay, but it's not really, I'm not going to count off for that. Okay, now, once you know how to find parts, missing parts of a triangle, you can do something that is called solving a right triangle. To solve a triangle has 6 parts. Okay, you got 3 sides, you got 3 angles. To solve a triangle, what's going to happen is they're going to give you 3 things. Okay, they could give you 2 angles and a side. They could give you a side and an angle, something like that. And we're going to find the other 3. Okay, so we're going to find everything. Now, to do that, there's a couple things from geometry that you need to remember. First off, all the angles in a triangle always add up to 180. So if our triangle is a right triangle, we automatically know that we have a 90-degree angle, which means these two would have to add up to be the other 90. Okay? So if they give me one angle, I automatically know the other angle. I'm just going to subtract from 90. That's easy. I also know from geometry if I have a right triangle and I know 2 sides, I can always find the third side by using the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where c is always going to be our hypotenuse, our longest side. Okay, so before we get into this, couple quick examples, little review of the Pythagorean theorem. If I am given a and b and I want to find c, that means I'm going to do 6 squared plus 8 squared equals c squared. So in my calculator, I'm going to do 6 squared. You can plug this in your calculator. 6 squared is 36. I'm going to cheat. Plus 8 squared is 64. I'm not going to type in 8 squared. I know what those are. Okay, so 100 equals c squared. And then I'm going to take the square root, and again, I kind of know what this one is off the top of my head. So c is 10. Okay, so that's when you're given the 2 legs and you're trying to find the hypotenuse. If you are given the hypotenuse, the problem is done differently. Okay, if I'm trying to find like side B, for example, I'm going to plug them into the to the theorem. It's going to be 5 squared equal, or plus, plus b squared equals 13 squared. Because I know the hypotenuse, that's going to go on the other side. So to solve this, I'm going to subtract. It's going to be 13 squared minus 5 squared, which is 25. Okay, and then I'm going to take the square root. So over here, because the two numbers are on the same side being added, I'm just going to add them together. But on this one, I'm actually going to subtract. Okay, so 13 squared, and I'm going to do minus 5 squared. That's going to give me 144, and then I'm going to take the square root of that. So again, square root is right here, so I'm going to hit second square root. I'm just going to hit the answer button, so second answer, and it's going to plug in that 144 that I just had, and it's going to tell me the answer is 12. All right, so B equals 12. So two different ways to use the Pythagorean theorem depending on how they present the information to you. Okay, so first example, solve a right triangle. So here's what they've given us. They've given us a triangle. We know 3 things. It looks like they only told us 2 things, but we know this is a 90-degree angle, so that's going to be the third thing. Okay? So, first thing, if they give you an angle, find the other angle. That's the first thing I'm always going to find. B equals, well, 90 minus 35 is 55. Okay? So, one down. We have 3 things to find. We found one of them. Okay, now we need to find either A or C. Now, can't use the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, that's not going to work. We're going to use a trig function. We're going to use one of the angles that we know, and then we're going to use 2 sides, one of which needs to be a side that we know, and then the other one could be a variable. Okay, so for example, and it doesn't matter, there's different ways to do this. So I'm going to use the 35 that they gave me, just in case I messed up here. If I use that bad number, it's going to mess up my next answer. So I'm going to use the 35, I'm going to use the 8, and I'm going to find side A. So what do I have? What kind of trig function is that? This is the opposite. That's the adjacent. So this is a tangent problem. So I'm going to set up a problem that says the tangent of 35 equals, and then A over 8. So this is one of those easy cross-multiplying problems. Tangent, 35, close my parenthesis, times 8. And I get 5.6. So A equals 5.6. Okay, that makes sense. This side is 8. It's across from a 55-degree angle. This side is across from a 35-degree angle. Smaller angle means smaller side across from it. So 5.6 makes sense. It looks pretty good. Okay, last thing, I need to find side C. Now I can do this a couple different ways. I could do the same thing I just did. I could use the 35, I could use the 8, and I could use side C. That would be an adjacent and a hypotenuse, so that would be a cosine, and I could set up another trig function and do cosine. But, since I have 2 sides, I could also use the Pythagorean theorem. Now technically, the first way I said is actually the better way. Because right now, if I do the Pythagorean theorem, 5.6 squared plus 8 squared equals c squared. What did I just do? Well, I used a rounded answer in my next step, which may throw off my final answer. Now, if it throws it off, it's going to be by a smidge, okay, a decimal. So I'm okay with it. If you want to go ahead and use the Pythagorean theorem here, and actually that answer was 5.601, so chopping those off isn't probably going to make a big difference. So if you want to do 5.6 squared plus 8 squared equals, and then take the square root of that answer, you're going to get I guess we're going to have to call that 9.8, and that's our C. Okay, and we just solved the right triangle. So I want you to take a look over here. I want you to try B. Go ahead and pause the video, and then I'll run through the answer real quick. But try this one on your own. So first off, notice what they gave you. They gave you 2 sides. So You could always find the third side right now if you wanted to. Then you need to find one of these angles. Okay, doesn't matter which one, but once you've chosen the angle you want, then look at the two things they gave you to determine which trig function you're going to use to set up an equation to solve. And then once you have one of these angles, simple subtraction, you got the other one. Okay, so try that on your own and then look at my answers. All right, so here's what I came up with. Okay, so check my answers. I used the Pythagorean theorem first. 4 squared plus 7 squared equals c squared. I got 8.1 for c. I then went, now I didn't use that for my next step. I went and I decided to find angle B next. B, I was given the 4 and the 7. I'm not going to use the 8.1. That's a rounded number. I don't want that. Okay, so I'm going to use the 4 and 7. That's the opposite. That's the adjacent. So I set up a tangent problem. Okay, so there's my tangent problem. I was finding the tangent of B. So to solve for B, I had to do the inverse tangent. And I got 29.7. And then angle A is just going to be, these two have to add up to 90. So I did 90 minus the value I got for angle B, and that gave me angle A. Okay, so take a look at the homework that goes with the story problems and solving the triangles, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.